so idam guranam yatayami
Sanje Chitang Tsuji Chanala Chanju Padu Tani Japsu Dagi Chiji Jive Sonam Ye Dola Benji Sanje Vaisho Sanje Chitang Tsuji Chanala Chanju Padu Tsuji Dagi Chiji Jive Sonam Ye Dola Sanje Druva Sho Sanje Cheta Tsoje Chana Lo Sanju Padu Tani Japsa Dagi Chijin Jive Sonam Je Sanje Druva Sho Ladana Mimida Miyaji Hongpada Jechina Sosho Jechala Sawa Chaba Sanje Sumbara Shi Deve Jiro Juba Jada Jije Tebe Jini Dini Dire Jiri Deve Jini Dire Jisavi Deju Tenjen Java de la Chun Saruba Yen Dia La Betenja Successuja Yemeda Ambia Daniela Batula Tuyasi Namo La Yakadan Jinga Tubunda Dami Kananda Kunjetan Chisa Tamje Gado Dagi Jeden Do Kangi Jedan Jivadan Chudi in Banjo Denjin Dewa Chunsom Tuan de la Chatalo Seoya Aya Dadri Kasoreta Riba Chujuala Hasereda, Yeba number Mitrochi, maybe Sipan Dilami, more than women young sheep, Tani Chamber number 2 Chani, what a disson in body. Yeba number Mitrote, maybe Sipan Dilami, and Yeba said Chanaranga Taniji Yabatsan Bayada. Yaba Mebati and it didn't Mebatawa, Mebatawa. Yebe number Midrodi, maybe Sibatilla means. Oh, that is maybe still a means. Then we don't make one shave and then Danny Chamber number 2. We don't say Gana and a quarter. We may shave a young and Deve. Quando io era si mi aveva scelto anni danni ci mo cola trova se to sono in batata ya cosa e number
So now, yes, what should we say? There's a verse from the 60 verses on reasoning, which says, by existence, one will not achieve liberation. By non-existence, one will not achieve the world. And through understanding existence and non-existence, that which exists and does not exist, one will achieve liberation. Will achieve liberation from this existence, samsara. So the first line where it says, by existence, one will not achieve liberation, that means here, misapprehending things as if they existed by means of their own intrinsic nature, means that misapprehension will entail that one cannot achieve liberation from samsara. And then non-existence, in the second line, the notion that things are completely non-existent, the nihilistic view will not enable one to achieve anything within this existence, within the world as well. So those two extremes, if one is clinging to or misapprehending and grasping at things as if they existed in either of those two ways, either existing by means of their own intrinsic nature or being totally non-existent, then one will not achieve either liberation or the things that one happiness within the world. And then by knowing existence and non-existence, it is said that one will achieve liberation. So here then existence in that sense refers to the fact that things actually do exist, and they exist in relationship to their causes and conditions, and they function as agents and objects of action. And then the non-existent side of it means again that they're not existing by means of their own intrinsic nature. Those two together, when one understands that, then one does achieve liberation.
Oh yeah, 아니 천하랑 그 천지지 여바진 비여다당 여다당 근데라서 봐 미루와 통해 매단 요어디 지시 미도와 아니 티시도 미도와당 야 천하랑 그 천지 여바진 비여다 나 여다스나 된지나 고거로와 여배 타스나 아니 라신지 주와달라고 근데라서 미루와 통해 라신지 매발라 근데 미루와 아니 따위 따와대 매다 아니 같이 타대 아니 근데라서 매발대 타대체 어텐다에 여봐봤다 제너라시 해봐 준대라서 미루마도 매단이 치시 미도로 만도와 대세도 아니 조금 말해서 영 비트와 조금 말해서 준대라서 미루매대我们去太阳所写完是讲安尼他我们去用太阳所写完写的他的安尼我不人我开始了扩张性的出啊当我们人家让性的出啊给安尼他听没把写完安尼我开始了你我们就把它出啊当我초화대 갑자기 얘기를 주님 뭐 저와라 초화대 자고 와래 yeah.
So now the explanation of that, which is given in the essence of good explanations, J. Rinpoche says that the first alternative there, the existence, meaning that things exist by means of their own intrinsic nature, that kind of existence is the extreme of existence. Extreme of existence refers to things existing by means of their own intrinsic nature, or actually more subtly by means of their own intrinsic identity. If one says that things exist by means of the condition of something existing by means of its own intrinsic identity is the extreme of existence, and then the view that holds that extreme, that holds things as existing by means of their own intrinsic identity, is the extreme view of existence. So that's grasping or misapprehending things as existing in that way. And then the second alternative, the extreme of non-existence, is the idea, is the supposed idea that things don't exist in any way whatsoever, such that one can predicate cause and causality to them, that cause and effect, karma and the results of karma are not something that can be established viably, and so the idea, if things existed that way, in that extreme of non-existence, then one wouldn't be able to posit causality in the general sense, or causality in the specific sense of karma and its results, and then things would exist in a nihilistic way in which one can't posit causality. So that's the extreme, that non-existence of causality being something that can be demonstrated rationally. And then if one clings to that extreme, then one has the extreme of one has the view of non-existence. So those two extremes and the two views that exist, in which actually fictitious ways that things are conceived to exist, as long as one has the view which grasps onto either of those extremes or both of them, then as long as one doesn't cast that aside, doesn't abandon it, then there's no way to achieve liberation. Now, liberation is here reference to the obscuration, the obscurations which are mental afflictions, the mental afflictions as such, so that until one is able to get rid of the mental afflictions, that portion of the obscurations within the mind, then there's no way to achieve liberation from samsara.
Oh yeah, that is into that too much. And that's 가려고人间称话给拿了。지대미주 따오대. 가서 대신미주 따오대. 지대 외제 매 봤어. 전부 다네 몽바데 몽바연나 면조로. 예바반에 된조도 매바반에 안 조조. 양다 지신 용신신 이란 마다 타바 주루 전에 다때 다다진데 시바인 바래 미주라 아니 미주 출마인 바라 출매신도 미주라 출나와나 신이 전에 지단 예제 매바시 세가라 아니 지단 대다 라시 예밤 다시 나시체 아니 양아 때는 매바 지단 예제 매바시 전바타네 몽바레 텐다와데 아니 마리빌레 마리바 미시바방게 zembaye mongbaye na ni tenda yo mongba ju le den chinje la anu ko la metro ba mongbaye na metro bo se o ka so re ran xin ji ye ba dan na yang le dang de bu na sha kai le na tenda yo le le gen na sha ani su xin de che wa la de de wu ani den zhuo zhuo ba ye ba ba ni den zhuo zhuo 라시지 메나 때는 매바开랑네 아니 로다 매바 따와네니 아 매바 때에 저우들라 렌데 매바 때에 저우들라 안 좋아 예바바니 된로도 매바바니 안 좋아서 양다 지신 용시비 세가나 양다 지신 용시비 된다위다 콘데 아니 라시지 마주바 양다 지시 용시 권대 라시지 모두보 아니 라시지 모두보 권대 라시지 동배 양다바 안 지시 시와데 양다 지시 양다 지시 용시 이라 마단 타바 추르스 이 다제게 타니라 마단 바 다다지 나시 전에 저와 아니 다제게 이단 저와가 아니 타바 토그레 전에다 리바 조조와기 용대장 레지트미 용대녀오데 다 대야지도 바꾸어
Now then there's also a quotation from the Precious Garland which says that this world is like a mirage. A mirage is something that appears like water, but it's not actual water, and that's actually commonly accepted within the world. Everyone who understands how mirages are recognized or knows that even though a mirage appears as if it was real actual water, it's not actual water. So just like that, this apprehension of things as existing by means of their own intrinsic nature, grasping at things, misapprehending them as if they existed by means of their own intrinsic nature is erroneous. Things don't exist by means of their own intrinsic nature, but they appear that way. And out of that, because of that, people who don't understand the actual nature of things, they see these things appearing as if they were real, as if they existed intrinsically from their own side, and then they misapprehend that appearance. They cling to it as if it was correct, true, and then they're confused as a result of that. So confusion arises because of this, the appearance of things as if they were real, and then our apprehension or grasping them as if they were existing the way they appeared, as if they existed by means of their own intrinsic nature. So out of that kind of confusion, different sorts of misconceptions can arise. The basic one is that things exist by means of their own intrinsic character or intrinsic nature, and but that kind of view that says things exist is actually superior in one sense, in that when we hold things to be real, we can, based on that, even though it's an erroneous belief, we can, based upon that, we can believe that there's real karma, there's real effects of karma, that real virtue will produce real happiness for real self, myself. And that's based upon that clinging to things as being real, as existing in the way they appear, we can then create virtuous karma, in fact, and then experience happiness, in fact, in the future lives, even though it's based upon misapprehension of the way things are. On the other hand, if we think that things are naturally or intrinsically non-existent, that if we misapprehend the way things exist and think that they're really non-existent, that there's no causal order underlying things, that things are just occur without specific causes and conditions, and especially that the events within our lives, the experiences we have, are produced without any kind of actual cause, that they're just random, then that sort of nihilistic view, which denies the existence of karma and its results, is much worse, in that based upon that misapprehension of things as existing, as being naturally non-existent, we can't predicate causality of them, then based upon that misapprehension, nihilistic view, then one falls into the lower realms of existence by denying karma and its results. So then the final lines of this verse are that the one who understands reality, this is referring to the Buddhas, they understand both existence and non-existence, and out of their understanding of existence and non-existence, because of that, they're liberated, completely liberated from existence and non-existence, from the samsara and even from samsara in particular.
Oh yeah, that tendrawi, ani kaasore. Kwanda rashi mebo taba la kwanda rashi mebo dan la ba ko yin zan da de kwanda rashi mebo dan la ba ba shun de ka san da ka ro ro yuan den tuan xian ji dan yin ba ga ba de la ngo dang yuan den xian mi dan ba dang kai lang ga ba yi yu be na ne dan bo ngo de la oh ya ka de ji bu me de na pomba mu ji bu me ju ro 내도 총방양 마인바 대장직도 민주로 세야 되겠다. 제 pomba 다 재수주의 pomba. 같이라 방방이 안에 제 pomba도 그거라. pomba 재수 되어요.
라게 네 말에 네 말에 니바 셰팔니 현대 각파당 랑대 각파 디치
안에 현대 각파서들이你这么的呀？因为现在搞把的，让的搞把你嘞，唐不现在搞把了，参与搞把的，参与搞把，唐不参与搞把的了呀？集团性的，在集团性一单元把搞把当，原点团性一单元把搞把一切，唐不在集团性的单元把搞把的了，你在每天讨论呢，看到我了，碰见了。만일 대단 오보야 분발해 섹시 미주로 스타처라 바기 수단 분발이 오디 재현 미미지스 분명 여바단 재현 인데스 수단 분발 재현 말이디 수단 분발이 여바단 재현레스 분발 재현이라 여바니 제위 다 여바니 시비 시켜는 거라 어디 여바니 제위 지천부团线지천부团线당 제와 여바 안에 예바디 제도线나 제도线나 세 제도线나 세 다더니 여바니당 분바니 지당 개바지参与 믿음 바 토네스 여바니당 분반이 여바 탐제라 조스 조와 그지 여바 세당 아니 분바 탐제라 제수 주베지 분반이 세야 될概念 거인 바다 거랑 여러 이상 여바니당 분반이 지단 개바제参与 믿음 바 토네니 인생 믿음 토네니 가정오 여바니라 니래 분바 재현 이는 아니 임바데 타바마 임바타스 임바데 타바마 임바타 오 여바니라 분바 재현 임바데 안테그 말레스 지신동 오 여바양 안에 분바라 재현도 지민주디 유그레스 시야데라 가정을 품시하나 많이 대단 오보야 분바라서 지민주 지민주로 시행 오보 여바양 분바라 재현도 진짜 지민수지 주어 유그레스 다더니 오보 여반이 분발라 제 안타자바 많이 받더나 분발 여반 많이 받죠 봐 그게 요아래 야
So now next comes the more detailed explanation of this. Well, first, in order to establish that both samsara and nirvana are devoid of intrinsic existence, the text here is negating things existing by means of their own intrinsic nature, intrinsic identity, and so forth thoroughly. So in the process of doing that, it rejects positions which are posited by both non-Buddhist philosophers as well as non-Madhyamika, other Buddhist philosophers. So first comes the rejection of position that's posited by members of other philosophical traditions, non-Buddhist philosophical traditions, that has multiple subdivisions. First, the rejection of a refutation of some kind of characteristics of things that would be intrinsically existent. Then the refutation of the basis for these characteristics, the things themselves that have these characteristics being real in the way that they're posited by other non-Buddhist philosophers. And so that first one has multiple subdivisions, a rejection of the characteristics of things, rejection that here it's talking about universals. A substance is here in the Vaisheshika philosophy, they posit a range of different real things that are substantially existent, and among them they posit universals. She's translating this as generalities, but I'm going to use universal for that. And then they have other ideas about how it is that the substance and the universal are intrinsically different, and showing if that's the case, then there's all kinds of unacceptable consequences that would obtain, so refutation of that. And then showing that these substances also functioning as the support of different kinds of specific particular qualities is impossible as well. So the first topic is here showing that the rejection of the idea that the substance is some kind of intrinsically different thing, or a different thing from the universal that is characterizing it, and that's impossible. So that's rejected in verse 328. And so here it says, the Vaisheshikas assert, though the pot and its form, here one could read that as visible form, are not different substantial entities, different substances, existence and pot are. The pot is a substantial entity and is said to exist through its connection with an important or great universal existence. So the pot is a substantial thing, and then the universal is different, which is something separate from it. And then the reply to that is given that since the two are seen to have dissimilar characteristics, if the pot is separate from existence, why would existence not also be separate from the pot? Existence and the pot are seen to have dissimilar characteristics of a universal and a specific instance or a particular thing specific of the universal. It is not feasible for a pot to be a substantial entity which is separate from existence, for if it were, why would existence not be a separate entity from the pot? If it follows that it would be, and if this is accepted, the pot is non-existent.
Oh yeah, that is new what they la. 原点天线机电影把搞把得了，我当原点天线没点吧，俺那开朗的搞把得了。然后他们我在那看的基本没得，那碰把我们基本没就了，那的从把马英白台家就没就就是，他贴着把个再碰把原点是，俺呢长期。那么讲，这个当你来说吧，这个当你来说别原点天线机电起不起谁呢？原点当在机推动。这个天，按照他说的，推动说特别起的是原点当在机推动，按照说吧，按照他把印章他的这个场碰把没得那。按你碰把样就都没就了，是看的这个场碰把样，按你这个场碰把的没得那，按你碰把样就都没就了，这点太不起来，谁来干了？看的就不没得那，才这把它，这太不起来。第二了，你来说话，我是你来说话我。 다되나 아니 분발라 지기 잘로 분발라 지기 잘로 된디 미지와 되게 된다지 분발라 지기 잘로 된디 미지와 주로 지금 미대는 분발 지기도 민주로서 되나 아니 분발라 지기 잘로 된디 미지와 주로 세대 좀 지기 잘로 된디 미지와 주로 분발 지단 된배 지도 주지 지 분발 민주로서나 분발 지단 된바 인자 아니 분발 지도 주로서나 지 분발 민주로서나 담바디 숨바 이거 담바디 숨바 이라 이제 미좀발라 민데 다 유전 이거 나는 유전 나시래 분바치라 담바 숨바양 마이라 분바치니 분바치니라 담바 숨바양 마이라 마이데 분바치당 대지 지 분바다 메다 비셔 분바치당 대지 지 분바다 메다 비셔 대장 분바치도 민주대 지니래 자신이 비셔 야
So then next comes the rejection of the refutation of the idea that something like a pot could function as the basis for some other qualities or properties. And so this is given in verse 329. The substantial entity of the pot exists because it acts as a basis for attributes. Ruth's translating that as Yundan as attributes. That's okay. As attributes such as 1 and 2, which are distinct from it. Answer, the reply to that, attribute and substantial entity are different words and have different meanings. And then the verse then elaborates on this. If 1 is not accepted as the pot also is not 1. If the number 1 is not accepted as the pot is not 1 either, because like 2 and so forth, these are different words and have different meanings. If this is accepted, the term and thought 1 do not validly apply to the pot. And then the opponent, the Vaisheshika, comes back and asserts, the pot is 1 by virtue of possessing the attribute 1, but 1 is not the pot. And the answer, reply to that is, moreover, possession is not reciprocal because also it is not 1. Possession occurs between two similar things, as in the case of consciousness. And here the consciousness is shorthand for the subject and perceiving subject and a percept or object of consciousness in general. The thing that the consciousness is perceiving or cognizing, and not between dissimilar things. Moreover, there is no reciprocal possession between the pot and 1, according to the opponent's position here, because the pot possesses 1, but 1 does not possess the pot. So these relations can't be reciprocal. The pot is also not 1 because of being a separate entity from 1.
Oh yeah. 다 대제를 가라고 대가 뭐지도 민주로 비 지니래 자신이 비치레스 아이 연대는 전신 미대 막칼란다 가와니 강지 지점 강지 세지 삼수나 세지지 삼수나 대지 수지 지대민 가디 치고 셈면나 흉루냐 바차와 주루 가라가라现确实原点在了点击，反正原点你我没得么得把嘎个是吧？嘎的，看个在碰把了随便出行给打你，去当先给打你，碰别去当先给打你其实，刚才打你给。有七针太针，手机出行给打你那是，看这几咱们说呢。대지 수지 지대 민세 되라다 아니 이나 대제 제 첨부 인바 제디 첨부 연바 진도 연된 수 첨부의 지대 마인데 서 지대 민데 선 지대 마인데 수라양 첨부 시의 연된 퇴상开两个线수라양 첨부 시의 본발 연된 퇴상开了吧那些수라양 연된 첨부 시의 연된 퇴상开两个线这开来了，原点你话每天把扩下个修路一百，接着把那个修路一百，除了差话的全部点把明显呐，他的结果让给得上来， 치고 철학의 대전에 현미나 최지雄루라 내제도 최지雄루 내제도 냐바쳐 와서 랑의雄루라 안에 내제도 안에 저바차와 균나양 되는 미래에 둘다 세워라 슈피체로
So next comes a discussion of how it is that these attributes couldn't function as the basis for, or the idea that attributes cannot function as the bases for other attributes contradicts the position of the opponent here, the Vaisheshika, him or herself. And this is given in verse 330. Furthermore, your contention that attributes qualify substantial entities, but that one attribute does not qualify another, is contradictory. And then the verse begins, if the form is the size of the substance, why is the form not large? Like visible form of a pot. If it's the size of the substance, the pot itself, then why is the visible form itself not large? If the size of the substantial entity, the pot, and the size of its visible form are the same, why is the attribute visible form not large just as the substantial entity is large? One must accept that form has a separate attribute, large. And then, So objection, small and large cannot qualify form. This is their position. The Vaisheshikas would say small and large cannot qualify form, for according to our system, textual system, really just means philosophical system, one attribute does not qualify another. Answer, the reply to that, if the opponent were not different, scriptural sources could be cited. If your opponents, meaning the Buddhists here, were not from a school other than your own, you could cite your textual your system. Here, this textual doesn't really necessarily have anything to do with it. It's the philosophical system to fault their argument, but it is inappropriate here, since we are engaged in rejecting these very tenets.
Oh yeah, that's 천시가바들라 천이지장 천신이 간도 주바 연면바 진이 차소 타대바 오여바 마이노 시가나 다시엔 이라서와 시엔이라서 연된 퇴상 가장 천시 분바 마가베 아니 분바란 거 연된 퇴상 가자 천시 분바 마가바 인자 분바란에 랑고 오니 예도 세나 분바란 거 천이 오니 예도 세나但你的看是的，越把你那说完你，越把你那说完你，耶稣就被参你当，参你简当，恐怕你多被参你都买完那是，哦，耶稣就被参你太了，多被参你都买完那是，参你即将参信你是的，哦，刚说的多被参你都买完那，看对呀我你这个，看对呀我你知道也把明白听你是哦，参信你看对知道也明白。也明白，给你，咱长期那么长，就你来说比长了说话，太太把样，你然后我也出比，你太太被拆洗当，拆洗了我太太被拆洗也把没弄，是的，听你常说太太把我也把没弄，是这
So then the opponent comes back and says, even if distinct attributes like separateness are rejected, refuted, the pot which they characterize is not refuted and thus exists by way of its own character. The reply to that is, by virtue of its characteristic, the thing which is characterized, does not exist. Such a thing has no existence as something different from number and so forth. If one contends that existence and so forth have the characteristic of accompanying things while the pot has the opposite characteristic, then by virtue of this opposite characteristic, the pot it characterizes does not exist anywhere by way of its own character, by way of its own intrinsic character. Such a thing, distinct from numbers like 1, 2, and so forth, has no existence as a pot established by way of its own character. In brief, something characterized which is a different entity from its characteristics, and its characteristics and characteristics which are different entities from that which they characterize cannot be found. Well, that's the conclusion, yeah.
대체다 거로 어디로 다른데 가봐도 이마다 어디
도나 진이랭고 타입의 진시당
알았어
도나 진이랭고 타입의 진시
도나 천이랭고 타입의 천시와 말이지 천시랭고 타입의 천이에 봐마이 넣었어 천시단 천시요던 오치고 그랬어.
So in brief, the summation of this is that something characterized, which is a different entity from its characteristics, or has a different character from its characteristics, and characteristics which are different entities or have a different character from that which they characterize cannot be found.
야, 나 되게 현대 가봐도 친사네. 나랑 그 대화 가봐대라. 초바지도 대화 좋아 제와 가봐. 초바젠 두마양 아니 초바지도 대화 좋아 가봐. 다뭐 초바 대화 좋아 가봐 대라양 아 제가나 지다대라 가봐 야나 편지 선발로 초바 가봐. 초바지 대화 거기 여기 나다. 디나네 랑그 체체 대화 제와 가봐서 된듯이 여기 나다 담보 대라. 초바지 나 타다 다나 가봐 대라. 초바 직당 타대라 다본다 직당 타대 다라 가봐 대라 이나네 오야 천이 남다 소소니 민질 분바 지마인 레리 분바 면아니 많이 태바 민주로 단 도제 와기 분바 잡고 아니 두제끼리 공부되고 하러와 분바 두제 계당 아니 랑기 분바대 랑기 소반에 예비 두제 계대당我记得咱们出发这是那，但普巴记得咱们没人把他，普巴记得咱们没人把他，参与那时候建议对这不那么当，说你明白，说明白，说没人把说，他说我谁的，我说没人把他，咱那这个节日是吧？你这也不那么当，我说没人把的，我就准备这个人被写日是。我就准备这了，安尼他刚说了，他们就准备，他们就准备这个样个了，我就准备这个人被写的，这个人被写，碰，安尼他我那个这个人被讲了，碰把这个人把那些错把的忙不，你在接错把的忙不，人把心都碰把的忙不用过来，可能我太太没这个人呐，错把的忙不要把那心钱呢，你碰把可能也忙不下火嘞，碰把也忙不你都觉得，太大那都在这热哇样，碰把就干那是，对，怎么是都在，都在这不热样碰把就干那，热碰把没那你，热碰把没那，你碰把也没过过来。我看是热碰把没的，碰把忙不你对他碰把那，你碰把就不这样，你看说的都在这要把那些呀，碰把忙不要把你都还太把民主了。Yeah.
So next comes a rejection of philosophers within our own tradition of Buddhism, starting off with the Sautrantikas, and so this is first comes a refutation of the idea that an extensive refutation of the notion that a collection can be established as a real singularity, a real single thing, and that has multiple subdivisions, 5 actually. So first rejecting that by, refuting that by examining whether it's a single or multiple, single or different, and that's the first topic that comes in this process of rejecting this position held by the Sautrantika school. So that's given in verse 332. The Sautrantika assertion, the pot and its 8 substantial particles are one real thing. One real thing. The reply to that, because the pot is not separate from its characteristics, it is not one. It follows that the pot would not be a real single unit because it is, by way of its own intrinsic character, one with and not separate from its 8 substantial particles. This is referring to particles like molecules that make up the material substance that is the physical basis of the pot, that is the physical pot, which have diverse characteristics. assertion, then they come back and say the pot is a plurality, it's not a singularity. Answer, in that case, there should be a pot for each of the 8 particles. For each of the particles, each individual molecule consists of 8, you could say atoms loosely, so each molecule, there would have to be a pot for each of the molecules that makes up the physical base of the pot. And then so that's the answer. If there is not a pot for each, plurality is not feasible. Since there is no pot for each one, the pot is not feasible as a plurality.
Oh yeah, that is. 这些说吧，这些其他的大把搞不的，但你我演了，那么反正拆不来，错把几率点把搞吧，演了反正拆不了，错把几率点把搞不得了，搞把我的体量搞把你预备哪年，但是搞把我的日点日当没点当，现在叫我写下没，提起诉说那么叫的话，那么跟着人嘛意思。 다 도제 개보데 아니 도제 개 편지 채봐라 아니 본바 찌도 주로시 편지 채봐라 전에 아니 초바데 좀내 초바라 초 채봐라 본바 찌도 주로시나 다 리바단 된바사 리자단 된바 리자단 된라 주시당 보다 리바단 미단바 다 수수 탐보 수단 치 打算是吧？日本的每天把数据说，看见日经，叫我写下话的没把提起，看见日经，叫我写话的没把提起的是，日点点呢，每天当看见叫我写下没是，提起的是，所以都在结果那么叫我来，叫我们贴吧来。 아니 본바 초반이도 nemba 나바 군들이 바마이노 본바 초바데 오니지 가서 오 초바지도 오니지 마 nemba 나바 군들이 바마이노. Yeah.
So next shows a rejection of this by looking at the way in which it is that the components that make up a pot they form a collection or a composite by contacting each other, coming together with each other. And so if that was real, if there was a singular real collection, that is the basis for identifying something as a pot, then these faults would obtain that are rejected here, and that has 2 parts: the actual refutation and the rejection of the response to this initial refutation that's given. So that's in verse 333. The pot is a single unit through the coming together of the 8. She has 8 substantial particles. This refers to actually a collection of molecules, you might say, where a particular molecule has 8 irreducible particles that are the substratum of it. And so the coming together of molecules forms a single unit, which is the pot. And then the reply to that is, the tangible and intangible cannot be said to coalesce. Thus, it is in no way feasible for these visible forms to coalesce. The pot's composite for these form here is ambiguous in the verse. Could be just physical things to coalesce, or referring specifically to visible form. The pot's composite can in no way be a real single unit due to the coalescence of the molecules that are composed of 8 atoms, irreducible particles, such as visible form and so forth, because the 4 elements which are tangible, so the earth, water, fire, wind, those atoms are something that one can experience through tactile sensation. They're tangible in that sense. They can be touched and so forth. Whereas visible form, odors, sound, and so forth, these are the other 4 atoms that go together with the 4 elements, basic elements, to produce a molecule, and so forth, are intangible and cannot touch and coalesce.
Oh yeah, that can you what the land got 결과这这吧，我们就是在家人在两个吧的吧，两个吧的了，所以碰别人了的，他那人是特不明，看起人了见没吧，他那人了见样讲没，是的了，喷水日本没呗，他那个草把碰把电脑先那是，他都在结果的喷水人呐。俺那多的话都，俺那都天前面开两个一张，有都全部这个喷水人呐，俺那下了人呐，俺那下了人被掐起当，俺那弄了人被掐起个你有那有都全部的掐起他给我的，是吧？告诉掐人呐，掐起他个，俺那恐怖就会见，俺那掐见告诉的。恰当见的马日了呢，俺那过恰恰的下位下了这边恰的弄了马日了呢，有的全部的恰恰他位更有一张，平时日本没把太大个草把碰把电脑先拿。碰壁时呢，碰壁原来的恰恰一把，原来的那这些碰把没的，所以呢碰壁原来的他那这些碰特不明哦，碰壁原来的碰壁所有的碰壁原来的恰恰一把，原来的那俺那碰壁所有的碰把马的是。碰壁那个都在这个吃的，俺那碰壁手那个恰恰一把，他那些人白天那些吃了说不行了是。原来了对比，原来监狱呗，他碰把赢了先呐，原来监狱，原来了对比，原来监狱呗。俺那原来监错吧，原来错吧原呗，原来错吧的碰把赢了先呐。对了，看个去书当吃说，书记说日了碰把没白一张，原来这碰把样，然后我也出把没把天呐。看起原来见没把他那原来家人没是，然后我也出把他把没了，原来家然后我也出把也把明的，俺那恰当结尾原来来让恰恰用过来，恰当结尾写的，恰当结尾写的是，
So then next comes the rejection of the response that the opponent here, the Sautrantika, would offer. And so here they would come back and say, even though there is no mutual contact between the molecules, their combination is the real pot. And so this is given, the reply to that is given in verse 34. Visible form is a component of the pot, and thus for a start is not the pot. The pot's visible form is a component or part of the pot, and thus for a start is not the pot, just as the odor or smell and so forth are not. Then they come back and say, but since a compound reliant upon its components exists, that is the pot. And then the reply to that is, since the compound does not exist, neither do the components. Since visible form, odors, and so forth do not each have a pot, the compound pot does not exist by means of its own intrinsic character. The components, too, therefore, do not exist by way of their own intrinsic character, because they have parts. So the Sautrantikas here would want to say that the individual atoms that make up a molecule are irreducible. They're not they're partless particles, but they nevertheless are pushed into this position that if a conglomeration of these atoms forms a molecule, then the problems that are enumerated in this verse and the other previous analysis would still obtain for them.
Oh yeah, that did yeah. 反正我做不这对电报过ไปหรือ把先电报得了一切为干了碰把电报中呢首先归碰把他话当碰被都在家讲这对他话都在家不这样这对他话一月别那年但他不碰把电报中呢首先归碰把他话呢虽然归了所以呢曾经没对没人呐就来碰把越觉起想到了没觉起越是那首先就来碰把越吧 是吧？本来是我们是不是的澎湃到我了，澎湃要把决心是不？首先记了澎湃去，打澎湃马英把那是，首先先到了明，那话说的澎湃明白有这些个澎湃冲把他什么冲把他是，提入了说完了，那话说的，提入了说了澎湃党那不了说所以那么贵了样是，提党说党澎湃党那不了说首先贵了样所以呢，所以说我怎么一句才能没得把马英拿是。在他们家了，所以说我怎么印章，所以说我印章，那才能没得把马英拿是，对呀，所以那么贵了，所以你的才能没得马英拿是。首先电报出完了，首先电报出完了，那么他们家都成为现实。首先电报出完了，先来让马来把印章，首先记了，澎湃要把就那首先他们家来呀，澎湃要把就做过来送过去当。
So next comes a demonstration of additional reasonings which reject the notion that there's a real a collection, a composite thing, which is single and real at the same time. So that has two subdivisions. First of which is if the pot was real, then all physical things would be pots. That absurd consequence would obtain, and this is given in verse 335. I'm changing her translation somewhat here. She has a lot of terms form, which I'm calling physical things. Why are some things that are physical things pots, and other things that are physical things not pots? If the definition of a physical thing applies without incongruity to all physical things, for what reason is one a pot and not all others? It follows that all should equally be pots, for if the definition that a physical thing is simply that which has physicality, she has appropriate as form, which is a literal translation of zuksurunga if you're taking zuk there as form, but I'm reading it as physical. So if the definition that is that a physical thing is simply that which has physicality applies without any incongruity to all physical things such as odors, flavors, and so forth, as well as pots and cloths, then real things that are physical should be the same in all respects. And so then, if that was the case, if this physicality was being physical was an intrinsic property that existed within the pot, then everything would be a pot, because if something is physical, it would necessarily have to be a pot. That absurd consequence would obtain.
Oh yeah, that. 同比那个独家节目的记住他话怎么着是吧？我记住他话太了我说他了首先性，同来没些阶段呐，在那没把让没看，特殊来先其他人是吧？手指说你手上提说叫经营把他，但是不把他经营不起来。你手指他在把心脑是那是。安保太太被送家每个安保来说话，安保太太被送家引不起来是，你提当若说他来首先引行是，提着来首先引行，提着安保太太首的每个安保送家引在，提着说来首先引行，通报来首先明显确断那是可是，若说他的首先性，同人没些确断呐，是首先确断呐，其他所来先比若拉说话，他那没把人所来先比若拉说话，他那没把澎湃让下顿没比，澎湃让下顿没比，澎湃看的所来先没用把原先没用被先对他是吧？所来先明白，看是澎湃让只是说。我年纪特别，我年纪太太把印章， 안에现用过的是吧？我你才来把这么推荐。
Then next comes showing that the particles of the pot would be reduced to a single thing. The molecules that make up the pot would also be reduced to a single character, single thing, and that absurd consequence would obtain according to the position that's being advocated here by the Sautranticas. So this is given in verse 336, and there again there's the ambiguity in the term zuk or rupa, translated as zuk by the Tibetan in the Tibetan. Sometimes zuk or rupa refers to physical things in general. Sometimes it's used in a specific connotation to refer strictly to visible forms, exclusive of other kinds of physical things like odors and sounds and so forth. So that ambiguity one has to read contextually here. It follows that visible, here it's visual form, odors, smells and so forth would also be one because of being one with the pot. Then the objection is given here. Visible form, smell and so forth are different. And then the answer is given in verse 336. If you assert that visible form is distinct from taste, or we could say translate that as flavors and so forth, tastes and so forth, but not from the pot, how can that which does not exist without these not be distinct from visible form? You assert that smell, taste, and so forth are distinct from visible form because they are objects apprehended by different senses, but that visible form is not distinct from the pot. Yet how can the pot that cannot be posited without taste and so forth, these other sensible properties of the physical sensible properties of the pot, which are distinct from visible form, not be distinct from visible form? It follows that they should be or would be, because for you the pot is different from visible form, smell, and so forth by way of its own intrinsic character. So here the argument is hinging on the idea that something like a pot and something like the sensible properties, physical properties that make it up have their own intrinsic character, intrinsic nature. And if that was the case, then these sort of incoherent results would obtain.
Oh yeah, 단디니 다시와 분바랑 그줄에 대바께와 가바니 분바라니 죄메 라니 대부 민주대 대시 수소 내sen도 분바가야 요마인 세대 어야 분바란 아니 분바라니 죄메 라니 대부 민주대 다 분바라니 수라서왕 랑공원이 지추 주여바 민베스 라 분바라니 수라서와 아니 랑전지 주여바 아니 주여바 민베 분바랑경 오유 주비 아니 저부 랑경 오유 주비 저부야 민주대 분바라니 주여베 라니 저부 민주대 대지 수라서와 그 야라 남래 先看多样啊，虽然说原来那么简，原来那么先看多样，先啊你不把啊，让我出吧，我你去出吧，这样也把明白，这样也把明白，虽然说罢了，老是不把妈咪比起来。太大了，我太太被不把买的，数量我太太被不把买的，是天气是说来现都，啊你不把这样远嘛赢，是咱都行不着，
Next comes a refutation of a rejection of the idea that something like a pot could be really produced, could really arise from its own causes, its own specific causes, and that's given in verse 337. The pot has no causes and is itself not an effect. Thus there is no pot at all apart from the visible form and so forth. Since visible form and so forth are not the pot's causes, by way of their own intrinsic, by way of their own intrinsic character, the pot is not an effect which exists by way of its own intrinsic character. Thus, there is nowhere a pot that exists by way of its own intrinsic character, or one could say, supply here, by way of its own own intrinsic identity equally, it comes down to the same thing, apart from its components like the visible form and so forth. Since a pot cannot be found isolated from its components, a pot that is a different entity or has a different character from them does not exist.
Oh, yeah. That's it. Rangi chashele tuwe tembar jewa kapa. Ore da. Pumba gyule chubchiji, gyule shenla chubchuna. Kala rale chumeba. Dili shenpo chita je sayade. Dachi di pumba ni rangi yanla chomo soji jebu minla. Teta jang jebu yinla, teta jang gyu yinlo sena. Mani kasare, pumba rangi gyule, ane drubar chushin. Pumba rangi gyule, pumba gyule chushin, pumba rangi gyule drubar chushin. Gyuni gyu shenla jang drubar chuna, gyute rangi ranju ngamala drubar chuna. Kala rangi ngoni le drubar meba ti, rangi ngoni drubar meba ti, lebu shenla chita jeba che serang. ngoni ji chuba me be jutela ani de wo shan chi da ja ba che de gula de go wa nam ni rang ngo chuba me la bi chen shan la de go wa yin dan ju chen shan la ra la ba yin da rang ngo ni ji chuba me la rang ngo yi chuba ju chen shan la ra ma la ba chumna ani ju me du ta wa ju we chero Pumba rangi chuba gobe riba, pumba rangi chuba gobe ribandi, ani debu samjala jawa chao.
So next shows the rejection of the idea that the pot here has risen in a real fashion, contingent upon its own parts, and this is given in verse 338. The assertion, the opponent then asserts, the pot is the effect of its parts, or components. She has, I'd save that for Yenlok, but anyway, components such as clay, and they are its causes. Answer, reply, if the pot exists by virtue of its causes, and those causes by virtue of others, how can that which does not exist by virtue of itself produce something disparate? If the pot exists by virtue of its causes, and those causes exist by virtue of other causes, how can that which does not exist by virtue of its own intrinsic character produce a disparate effect? Anything, therefore, that needs to rely on causes does not exist by way of its own intrinsic character. If it existed by way of its own intrinsic character, it follows that it would be causeless. This reasoning, which refutes the existence of a pot by way of its own intrinsic character, should be applied to all effects. Everything that arises from causes is contingent. It depends upon the causes that give rise to it, and that contingency or dependence precludes something existing by means of its own intrinsic character.
Oh, yeah. That did it. That Sobajan to my young. Sobajan to my young, Sobaji to Damba Trude, Damba Truba Gabatella. Trouble do our Chujasu, Trini to Dunit, Midate, Tena Pumba Shin Soba, Jenny to the Miriso. Oh, Diana Mambo Yang. Mambo Yang, Pumba Chick to Danshana, Yana Mambo Toba de Pumba Chick to Danshana. Sudan Trilla saw a Pendry Trapper dual Chujangs. Pendry China dual Chujang. Suju need to Midate, dual Chujang, Sudan Trini to Midate. Also, Midate, Sobala Leva Namni, Ane Rarang Tani, Midrava. Rarang Mizabata. Mijaba Amboso Yusoso Rarang Silla Mindra Yoa Inza Yoti Rarang Tani Mindra Chiri Suji Sudan Triso Jansi Treva Duva Chujanja Trinituni Meteto said Suji so Penjun Dujang Dujang Rashi to Minjua Tena Presentation Ani 천인남다 소소 천인남다 소소와 마인 비체를 분바직 민시 분바직도 댐바 가바 신도 스타데 천인남다 소소와 메데 댐바 가자라잖아 댐비 소소와 멤바 치리 분바직 인시 분바직도 댐바 가바 신도 초바직니다 댐바 초바 메리소
So next shows the idea, a rejection that something that even if it's not a component of a collection, I'm sorry, even if something is not a component of a collection, the idea that it is real, existing as a single collection, the idea of a real single composite is being established as real. That is rejected or refuted here. And that's given in verse 339. Though it has many components, the opponent here says, though it has many components, the pot is real, a real single unit. The reply to that, though they meet and come together, visible form cannot be smell. Therefore, like the pot, the composite cannot be one. Though visible form, smell, and so forth meet and combine, visible form cannot be smell. So, for the things that create the composite, do not give up their different characteristics, specific characteristics. So, visible form has its own specific characteristic. Smell, the odor of the thing has its own specific characteristic, because these things operate in different ways to produce different sense experience, sense perception. Though visible form, smell, and so forth combine, they do not have a single nature. But their nature is not single. That's in terms of here. If one applies the object of negation here, the idea that things exist by means of their own intrinsic character, then one can apply that here as well. Thus, just as the pot as a single unit was refuted by the words up in stanza 332, because the pot is not separate from its characteristics, it is not one. The composite too cannot be a real single unit. So this can be applied to any kind of thing which is composite. That the idea of it being a singular thing and being real at the same time is impossible.
Oh yeah, that 초바제 내가 좋아 가봐들라 시체네. 수지서 마도바 초바되면 뭐 중도면 지나치 중화되면 좋아 가봐. 길래 가봐. 매일 되면 가봐. 다 담보 수지서 마도바 초바되면 매비 초바되면 매바신 중화는 되면도 중앙 되면 매바니 사실.其他수소 마도바 pomba yoba mayino 대신 롱라 소와니 마도 소장 yoba 메이스 ngara sheba ge ani ribe namba jabana ani chida sudan chiso madoba ani choba pomba deba yoba mai deba yoba memba 대신 도 ram chida chiso madoba pomba yoba mayimba 대신 도 다 중화시나 롱라 소와 중화시보는 마도바 양라 수장 다바여 바 마인데 대다 아니 대다라 때는 다위체를 대다라 때는 다위체를 세가나 대신 롱라 소와는 마도 수장 여 마인
So next comes a rejection of the notion that the components which make up a single, a composite, are real, refutation of that, and that has multiple subdivisions. Here, first of which is showing that there's no such thing as a real component of things, apart, just as there's no real composite made up of components apart from, and we're talking about physical things here, apart from visible form, smell, odor, etc. Apart from those, there's no real composite. Similarly, there's no elemental derivative that's not contingent upon the elements themselves. And that's given in verse 340. Here it says, just as the pot does not exist apart from visible form and so forth, likewise visible form, that has to be qualified here, visible form does not exist apart from air and so forth. So visible form is a derivative of the elements, and then air, etc., wind and so forth are the elements, the basic elements themselves. So just as the previously explained reasoning shows that there is no real pot apart from visible form, smell, and so forth, there is no real component, visible form, the component that makes up the pot, apart from the great elements such as, she has air, wind is another way to translate that, for it is dependently designated upon these.
Oh yeah, that didn't cause it. 다 중앙 대마 주와 가바텔라 차와 메니 투주데 차와 멤버 치다시 대나 비시 세자와 예매 대매 매민시 룰라서와 마도바 수지소 미스바신 마도바 아니 수단 치소 미스바신 중앙 첨부 나장 아니 편지 때문에도 원이 좋아요 말해서 편집지라 때문에 원이 좋아요 말해서 원이 좋아 매발해서 대만인 바카르에서 나 기타 매니 투주대에서 니다 매니 쓰바보이나 아니 중화숨 매니 쓰바보이나 중화숨 식자인노 중화숨 제단이지 비신관나 매 쓰바이나 중화숨제 단위지 비신관나 매스바이나 그래서 비신 차와 메뉴도 주대 차와 메뉴 주대대 비신 차와 메뉴도 주대 쓰지 비신 멤버 메노 아니 차와 멤버야 기다릴때 차와 멤버야 기다릴때 아니 매다 만들어치래 매다 만들어치래 대나 매다 마드위 비신 시자와 아니 매라 마데비 부시 시자와 세제 매라 마데바기 세제 부시 시자와 랑근 오예바 매라 대매베 부시나 마데베 매라 랑근 오예바 마이노 세 대나 부시 시자와 예미 대매 매민 세데마라.
So next shows a rejection of the idea that the elements, the basic elements themselves, earth, water, fire, wind, are real, and that's given in verse 341. It says that that which is hot is fire, but how can that burn which is not hot? Thus, so-called fuel does not exist, and without it, fire too does not. Fire burns only fuel, whose nature is the other three elements, yet hot fuel is fire and no longer fuel to be burnt. If it is not hot, since it is unrelated to fire, completely unrelated, how will it burn? Thus, fuel, she has independent fuel which is not contingent upon fire, does not exist by way of its own intrinsic character, and because of this, fire which is not contingent upon fuel does not exist by way of its own intrinsic character either.
나디 가로 나디 제라 좀바티 랭가바데로 랭가바텔라 가데세네 차와야 태양지대매 메주로 근데 미산 나오셔 대라 여제 참미롱 다 비신이 가서 싸와라 소용오래 싸와라 소용오이자 차용오 말에 사용오 많이라 매일 시기 남바나 비신이 매일 시기 남바나 차와 주배 들리다 가서 매일 시자래 세나 가데 비신 매일 시기 남비 제 안에 체 차와 주와 이나야 대양 지대매 민주화의 주화타 가데스네 차와야 태양지대면 민주로 주화타 텐라와데 차시 쓰비셰 차시 쓰바 임비셰 연데 뒤에서 비신 미사나 세메투 비신 메이세 비신 미사나 차와 미비 오고 샹 메라 차와 민바 오고 샹 메라 메라 예제 샤 차와 미비 오고 샹 예 샤와야 미루라 근데 미사나 근데 미사나 뭐 샹 미사나 야 미루라 대주된 대지 중화 숨당 차위스 아니 어디다 중화식이 나나 사다 추당 농당 차위 아니 차와 잠시 매주나 아니 중화 전부는 지금에 주시 매비 치료 아니 대나지 주시 지나게 현지주의 기대 많이 받고 깨어와래 스탠이다 저거 농디상으로 현지주의 편진제 현지주의먹이 아니 편지 기대에 받더니 윤재 현지주의 편진제 주시 시샤바다 가와 주위치로 저거 내가서 현지주의 기대에 받자바다 가위치로
Next comes rejection of the reply that the opponent would give to this, and that's given in verse 342. The opponent here asserts fuel is hard and so forth, but not hot by nature. When it is overpowered by fire, it grows hot and is that which is burnt. The reply to that is, even if it is hot only when overpowered, why is it not fire? Yet if not hot, to say fire contains something else is not plausible. Even if fire grows hot, even if fuel grows hot only when overpowered by fire, why is it not fire? It follows that it should be fire because it is hot and burns. Yet, if fuel is not hot at the same time, it is implausible to claim that something else which is not hot is present in fire. In that case, just heat divorced from the other three elements would be fire, but if one of the great elements does not exist, the others cannot exist either. Moreover, this contradicts the statement, and this is a quotation from the Abhidharma Kosha, the Treasury of Metaphysics, things that arise simultaneously are reciprocal effects, like, and then the example that's given is like the elements.
가대 대라 시연나这个大家都有名是哦다 가대 매일 대기 도 차랍 라 아니 사실 면은 숨지 정해서 매배 아니 피시양 매봐야 매여도 세나 매배 피시양 매배 매여도 세나 예예도 세나 매도 차랍래 피시면나 매도 차랍래 피시면나 가데 둘라 시면나 세대 매도 차랍래 피시면나 대나 시예비 시매비 매여도 냠 예도 돼 가서 시매비 매여도 돼 매여배 규매비 매여바 타와 규에 대나 시매 매여나 세대로와 규매벽에 매여바 타와 규에 제라바다나 내지도 제开朗바 미샤오看不到규매도 타와 제대 가대 매도라 피시연나 규매도 타와니라 제네 아니 매도들라 피시연나 매도들라 피시연나 这个当你讲都要把明白他가대 달라 시연나 这个当你都要明白这个当你讲都要把满眼把它都日来样那什么话有些中国现什么事情就是有些
Next comes a rejection of the idea that the atoms of fire, the particles of fire, would be real fire, real fire, and that's given in verse 343. Here, the opponent would assert, since the other three elements are not present in the smallest substantial fire particle, there is fire even without fuel. And then the reply to that is given in the verse 343. If the particle has no fuel, fire without fuel exists. if even it has fuel, a single-natured particle does not exist. Fire without fuel exists in the smallest fire if the smallest fire particle does not have fuel. Since it therefore would follow that uncaused fire exists, one would and should not assert a smallest substantial particle as do the Vaisheshikas. One would end up holding their position. If one admits that even the fire particle has fuel for fear of the conclusion that it would otherwise be causeless, it follows that there is no single-natured particle, because, since the other elements are certainly present in each particle.
Oh yeah, that jidan tuma taba gaba la. Damba tu jidan tuma tanya gaba tela. Jitu zaji daji ngo dendu gaba tang. Yewa de xiande la ya chumba wo. Da tambo jitu zaji daji ngo dendu gaba ni. Ngo kankan yuan da ba tete tela jini me. Oh, kangi jijan yuan mi na. Tena tuma jijan me, tena tuma taja me, said Tadi, Tumba Dana Bula so over Kanda Kang, Deba Tuma to Yonso Tabana, over Kanda Yon Daba, Deba Tuma to Tawana, that Deba Yona, and it Deba to be Chita to Makarun to Malte Mateva Inzang, Chili Yona, and the Chita to Makarun to Yoke. Chita to Makarun to Mana, Melgo and Nashi. Damba tuna yang jidan tuma karun de yoke, jidan tuma karun de mene damba metu go yuan zang, ina rongso dawa na ngo tela damba tubi jingyi me de se, jingyi me de chaje yin bichel, damba tubi jingyi me de chatan je bichel, yunzang kangi ka so de, wanda ba tedan tela jingyi me se. 아니 차제 임비체를 괜찮은 관계니 담바 주베 직장 여바 매바 되나 된주 담바 주베 직매나 아니 도마치를 되네 샤고와 인자 아니 된주 도마야 요 말이지 괜찮은 관계 담바 주바 직장 여바 매바 되나 담바 주 도마타자 매데 도마니 직상발에 주미체를 도마니 직상발에 주미체를 관계 직장 여매바 되나 도마타자 매 세대라 도마니 직사발에 주미세를 치다나 그 오원한 담바를 매대 내주 직다 도마다 차위세를 단 너무 좀 가서 우마지에 소환하신 다다 시민 어디다 야다반이 직받아 투매랑신 차위세 담바 매대 소년신 세네가 시워저고 우마장가나 숨바다 대지바인 말에 가자 된루라 차라셔라만도
So next comes rejection, refutation of these positions by examining whether there's things are singular or plural in nature, and that has multiple subdivisions. The first of which is that by a rejection of there being real things by means of examining through by the reason that they are devoid of being either singular or plural. Singular or plural, that reason, since they're devoid of being separate, not singular or plural, then there's no real thing. And that's given in verse 344. When different things are examined, none of them have singleness or are singular. Because there is no singleness, there is no plurality either. When functional things like pots and woolen cloth are examined as to whether they are or are not real, these various things, because they have parts, do not have real singularity or singleness. This is saying that if something is real, then it necessarily has to be singular or plural in its basic character. If when one is examining things from that point of view, then things like pots, cloths, and so forth, because they have parts, they can't be real singularities, single things. Nor do they have a real plurality for the very reason by which they are not real singular things, since plurality comes about through an accumulation of single units. External and internal phenomena are not real because they are neither one nor many. They are like reflections. So this is employing the reasoning of that things are neither singular or plural in character. This is given in the Master Shantarakshita's ornament for the middle way. And the only difference between the reasoning here and what one finds there is that the subtlety of the object of negation, which is at issue, but the reasoning is the same. The absence of singularity or plurality with things. If things are real, they have to be either singular or plural in character, and they can't have either property character because and thus things are like reflections.
Oh yeah, 여기 가서래.我这单提了，那么准备进没得恰恰应被切的是，恰当结尾，那么准备进马英巴啦，马英巴的看着过来噻，恰恰的囊住了，我他的都那样，囊住了我让个恰恰上。本来碰不到我，让个告诉了囊住了，让个恰恰那么我记住。那讲那时候的那个切线的我太太多那玩一张，那时候的那时候没对吧一张，那时候的那时候没对吧的电把出发了，那电把出发了，搞完的是吧？电把人那那时候的那时候通把就过关完，那时候的那时候没对吧，电把出发了，搞完一张，那切线一张，但那电把人那时候的那时候没对吧用过一张，那电把出发就买的，是过来的。是吧？恰恰引进的干了，囊住了，让个恰恰那么我记住，那我太太都那张，那时候了，让个恰恰那么我记住出发的意思。那么出发人呢，囊住的那时候没地方用超过买的，人家吃的习惯了，他准备记人呢。
So now then, the way a thing appears to us, like a pot, for example, it appears as if the parts that make up the pot have a different character from the pot, and but in reality, there is no different character between the parts that make up the pot and the pot itself, the thing of which the parts are components. So within that disparity between the way things appear and the way they actually are. Obtains for when something is appearing as real, but when one understands that it's not real, then that sort of disparity is no longer at issue. It no longer occurs.
Oh yeah, that everybody. Rande kaya ki, rande dote wa kaya ki ripati, ane siya la chumpati re imbara, te nyawa di siya la ya chumpati. Kade kana ngoy tenam, me di dote wa san chiram mawa, rwa. Kade chendo ni kade kana ngoy tenam, me di chi che tena, kangu kuen la sumni yu, tena chi yu ma yin si. 다 공기 순진데 랑게 대화라 중화탕 전도라 주주 현지 중화开朗巴拉 太极 현지 주주 주제 开朗巴拉 开현지 중화 중주르자 치료와라 민데 가데 대달기 강하나 살라 소비 두차랍 대래 셴비 누차랍 대라 셴비 오테나 메바 테레스 가데 가나 오테 남 메테레 세디 메바테 사이 두전 다바 지보 예제 되나 메바테 사이 두전 다바 지보 예제 되나 대달기 루라 사이 두차랍 대라 제니당 제자분들 지니당 여반이 제수미여라 되되나 수미여라 강경태 꾸이나 수미여 什么月啦？元旦那样元旦你当，今你当，要把你是什么月呗？原先看个贵了什么月吧？天呐，咱们去今你困了，路得了月吧？没应呗，太大了呀！你我出把困了哦，才对了，我对了，太大贵了什么月呗？天呐，今年月没应。
So next is showing how the faults that obtain in that analysis that's been applied now to the Buddhist philosophers who posit real things is applicable in a similar fashion to members of other tradition, non-Buddhist philosophical traditions, and that's given in verse 345. Though they assert that there are none of those things, though they assert that where there are none of those things, there is singleness. Singleness does not exist, since everything is threefold for the Vaisheshikas and so forth. One may think this refutation applies to our own philosophers, members of our own tradition, who assert that the elements and elemental derivatives occur simultaneously, but not to outsiders who assert that a small permanent earth particle, which is a single unit, exists where there are no functional things apart from the smallest particles such as earth particles and so forth. Yet even in their system, the smallest earth particle, sort of atoms of earth, is threefold in that it has the substantial entity, singleness and existence. Actually, I would just say that it exists as a substance. It has the quality of being a substance. It has the quality of being singular, and it has the quality of existence. Those three qualities. Attributes have the quality of being attributes, the quality of being singular, and the quality of existence. By virtue of the fact that everything is threefold, even in their system, unaccompanied singularity does not exist. Thus, precisely the same fallacies apply to them.
다디 시와 타시 고베 르바 셴란 자와니 다 가서래 나래 제와다 셴래 제와다 다시 여다 매다 예매다 예매 민시 차위추 니네 개비 징이소 다라 다도 자와차 나 다제 고바 유진의 대우 여바마와 장见바 소탕 是吧？常见决定的这个也把打来结吧，看决定的这部原来，俺那结吧开两把业障，俺那常见吧说当，决定的这部没讲，决定的把开两把，打多的吧当300把，那是吧？300把的钱是吧？他提干了，2把没人把让信息做完了，咱那他让就把没钱打中国，现在就把开两个是吧？让信打了那个没打把原本你个开两把几不我当是吧？让信打了那个没打把你个开两把就几不我当是当然没现在一年没居民有些的，等于他。我再说也讲，第一张相对绝对没白，因为你个明显想法的发现不对了，两毛不比对吧？来讲我们说看啥人家对，两毛不比对吧？现你的绝对没白，因为你个明显想法，开朗不过别这个，这边出第你。太困难你就退了，那么这边所开发给，那么这边进一趟。那么出去嫌你当，那么出吧给你个当，你个马人把了，说吧我把他了，俺那大头家伙瞧，
So next comes the application of the application of these reasoning which refutes the four extremes, applying that to others here as well, and that's given in verse 346, where it says. The approach, she has the approach, I would just say, the way of existence, non-existence, both existence and non-existence, and neither, should always be applied by those with mastery or skill to oneness and so forth. Those should always, to the idea of singularity and so forth, the notion of oneness. Those who have mastered the art of employing the meaning of reality always refute singularity, or here, oneness actually probably refers to identity, otherness, both and neither, by applying the kind of reasoning which refutes the assertions of those like the Samkhyas, who claim that the effect exists at the time of the cause, of the Sautrantikas, who assert that the cause and effect are real, but the effect does not exist at the time of the cause. So here the first one is rejecting the Samkhyas, for example, posit that the effect exists at the time of the cause. And so what their view is that things arise from themselves, in a sense, that the effect pre-exists within the cause. In an unmanifest form, but regardless, they're saying that the effect exists at the time of the cause. Sautrantikas assert that cause and effect are real, but the effect does not exist at the time of the cause. So they would say that the effect arises from something that is other than itself, but because they're positing something as being real, then the effect and the cause are both real, and so the effect is something that is separate from the cause in a real sense. If one modifies the object of negation here to say like ultimate existence instead of it being real, then one could apply this sort of production from other and the rejection of the notion of production from other to all of the schools of philosophy from the Swatantrika Madhyamika on down. And then finally of the Nirgrantas, who assert both the existence and non-existence, and that a thing is permanent in its nature, but she says temporarily impermanent, or one could translate that as that depending on the particular occasion, the thing has a permanent character or nature, but the occasion makes it impermanent. So they're trying to maintain that things are both permanent and impermanent, or that there's existence, the thing exists and is non-existent simultaneously in a sense. And then of those who assert that things are, though things are substantially existent, they neither exist nor do not exist, since they cannot be said to be this or that. This last alternative is, one example of this would be the Vatsiputriya school of Buddhist philosophers, who say that one cannot say the things are substantially existent, but one can't say definitively whether they exist or do not. One can't determine that. So with regard to these, one can apply the reasons that were. I'm sorry, we haven't gotten to that part yet, I don't think.
네가 많이 받았다 잡아쳐. 말 콘도 셰비. 저우니 칸데다 세대에게 다다 셰바비. 가서래. 예매 기고 때니 된지면 sheso당. 아니 어디 가서래다. 대만메디 니네 이fon보시에 대만메디 땡데 임베시가가라 땡데 그 땡세당. 가사체 대만메디 땡루지다 땡루 주마 좀 하루도 마주게 세세와게 아니 지주라 그 땡세당. 누구 줘제 된다만 메제제 아니 다다샤다 니가다 규명 칸라야 미치실 세게 아니 무시지고 그때지 오다 든좀마 안타다라 아닌 자와 차오 세타다 아닌 자와 차오.
So then the idea is that so anyone who is maintaining any of these positions, these can be rejected by applying that is, those who have mastery of reality, who understand reality. They can apply the reasons that were previously explained and up in verse 265. For those who assert that effects exist, one can apply the reasoning of dependent origination, like, for example, the 5 appropriated aggregates are not real because they're dependent originations. The lack of being one or many, that reasoning that which shows that something that is ultimately existent can either be singular or plural in character and thus cannot exist. And then the diamond fragments reason, which rejects, for example, causality, things arising from self, other, both, or without cause. That kind of reasoning all can be employed to eliminate things being real in the sense that they're posited by these various philosophical traditions. We'll stop there.
Om Benza Bhumi Ahum Wanchin Sekhi Sarashi Om Benza Reke Ahum Chi Chari Koryu Igor Weusu Rikya Pori Rab Charlu Apollo